Biodiversity is the variety of life in the whole world, or we can also look at a particular habitat or ecosystem, and it's responsible for the ecosystem stability, genetic variation, human well-being, um, and right now biodiversity is globally threatened by climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, and invasive species. So APES later in the units really dives into how biodiversity is threatened. But there's three main types of diversity, which we are going to look at: ecosystem diversity, genetic diversity, and species diversity. And these are all crucial to the success of life in a biome, which is what Cade talked about, all the different types of biomes. Now we're going to look at how biodiversity kind of works in those. So biodiversity is really good. We want biodiversity. We want high biodiversity. So the more diverse an ecosystem is, the better it can respond to environmental stress. However, biodiversity loss only increases how these stressors affect the ecosystem. So biodiversity is good. Humans can sometimes cause biodiversity loss. So those stressors that can kind of lead to, so if there's low biodiversity and then an environmental stressor comes, that can lead to a loss of biodiversity. So those stressors can be natural disasters, changes in air quality, water quality, global warming, things like that. So it can be natural, it can be things that just happen no matter what, and it can be things that humans cause, which you'll look at both types in APES. So just on this slide about how biodiversity is good, I want to talk about the three types of diversity which are really good for our environment. So ecosystem diversity is the variance of different ecosystems in an area. So the tropical rainforest, it has a lot of different niches. So places that species can find a way to function and work in the environment. So if there's lots of different places in a biome that species can really work in and survive and thrive in, that increases biodiversity. And this is important for biomes because the more ecosystems you have in an area, the more places for those species to reproduce and live and help out the general environment. And then genetic diversity is how genetically diverse, right, a population is. So we're thinking different genes. One example that is good is banana plants don't have a lot of genetic diversity. So if a disease comes, all of them are going to be wiped out, right? Genetic diversity means that when an environmental stressor like disease comes, some organisms in the population are going to be resistant, whereas some might be susceptible. So that means that some can survive and the species can continue to live. So genetic diversity is really important to responding to things like disease. And then we also have species diversity, which you might have heard comes in two ways: species evenness and species richness, which we will talk about later in Unit 2. And next up, we have the IUCN Red List. So this is the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List of Threatened Species. Okay, so this just really provides information about global extinction risk status of an animal, a fungi, or plant species. So we are looking at what types of this list will tell us about what animals are in danger of going extinct, or what animals need greater attention, and we should start applying conservation strategies for. And an organism's extinction or complete disappearance, it results in biodiversity loss. So thinking of those three ways, those three examples of diversity that go into biodiversity. Species diversity. If a whole species goes extinct, there's less species in the environment. That's less things contributing to the general health of the environment. So extinction is really bad for biodiversity. And also you can think of the food web or the food chain. So if one species in it goes extinct, the one above it, the one that preys on it, they are going to decrease in number because there's less of their food available. And the species that went extinct preyed on, that species is going to grow in size too much from the environment because the species that kept its numbers in check went extinct. So this list really helps us keep track of what animals we need to make sure we conserve and don't let them go extinct so that the catastrophic effects of extinction don't occur in the ecosystems that we're watching. And now we'll look at biodiversity loss. HIPCO is a really good mnemonic device that you can use to remember the ways that biodiversity loss can, or the main causes of biodiversity loss. So if we'll start with the H, we've got habitat loss. And the main cause for biodiversity loss is habitat loss. If these species do not have the habitat that they need to have their niche and survive and reproduce, obviously the species is going to decrease and the biodiversity of the ecosystem is going to decrease. So examples would be deforestation and coral bleaching. Whenever a forest is deforested, all the little places that things like birds or the organisms that need the shade of the trees, and that whole ecosystem is disrupted, and that leads to biodiversity loss. And then we can look at invasive species. So non-native species outcompete the natives for limited resources. A great example of this is zebra mussels. I know in my AP test last year, zebra mussels came up in the FRQs, and invasive species are a good thing to know is that they come from somewhere else. They come into an ecosystem, and since they're from somewhere else, they're not in the natural food web and food chain of things, right? So they don't have any natural predators. So they're able to just kind of go crazy on the food, right? That means that their population remains unchecked. They can just grow forever, and then they take the food from the native species. So the native species have less food, but they still have those natural predators that rely on them to eat food. So what happens is the natural balance is disrupted because the animals that were native are having to compete for food with an organism that doesn't have natural predators like they do. So invasive species are very bad for biodiversity because they lead to the native species declining. And then P for population growth, this is the first P, but this population growth increases demand for resources worldwide and can lead to overexploitation. So there's one good thing to think of for this is kind of like urbanization. The population is growing, right? The Earth's population is growing. That means that we are going to need more places for people to live. So as the population is growing, the cities are getting bigger, right? Anywhere people are living, houses, it's getting bigger. We're taking up more space, and that leads to our first H, right? Habitat loss. Because our urbanization and urban sprawl, that's a good thing to remember. Urban sprawl is causing habitat loss, right? Because our population's growing up. We need a place to put all the people, right? Also for population growth, it increases the need for resources. So I don't know if y'all were in preview 2, but we talked about how previously with Malthusian theory, he predicted that humans would reach their carrying capacity or their population would start to curb. It wouldn't start growing up anymore because we would run out of food. But since we had the agricultural revolution, we were able to increase our carrying capacity because we are able to make more food. So population growth, even though we were able to make more food, by making that food, we are increasing our demand for resources and taking that away from the earth. The tragedy of the commons is a good example of overexploitation, but where we are taking more from the earth than it can give us and it can replenish, right? So population growth leads to an increase in the demand of resources. Then we have our next P, which is for population. For pollution. So litter, greenhouse gas emissions, and runoff are some of the common environmental pollutants. So pollutants are very bad for biodiversity. You can think of the classic turtle with like a six-pack plastic circle thing around its neck, fish nets, everything that. Think of the ocean and the effects of the Great Garbage Patch, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. How that is taking habitat space away from the animals, how it is affecting how they can get their food, and then we can think of litter and greenhouse gas emissions, how that is shifting the environmental conditions out of what the animals are used to, and that is an environmental stressor. So that can really lead to biodiversity loss through things like the fish eating plastic or things like that. C, we have climate change. So one of the effects of global warming is climate change, and this can result in habitat loss. So think of how climate change and the temperatures going up can cause glacial melting, and that can lead to the sea level rising, right? Because of climate change. And that can lead to a grassland turning into a marsh. And then the animals that were in the grassland and are grassland animals, their habitat is lost. And if we look up at that H again, the most important one, habitat loss can lead to biodiversity loss. So if those animals don't have their habitat anymore, they are going to be less successful at reproduction and carrying the species along. So that can lead to biodiversity loss. And then O, we have overexploitation, which kind of goes with that P right there, population growth. And so overexploitation occurs when resources are over-harvested. So I know I mentioned the tragedy of the commons briefly, but that is whenever a common good, so something like the oceans, right, where anybody can go get fish, right, whenever that is overexploited and let's say it's overfished, right, all the fish are gone, their species are the population is plummeting because of how much people are taking, because it's a common good, right? So that can lead to a decline in the population and a decline in biodiversity. So one good thing to remember for the tragedy of the commons is on FRQs, they might say propose a solution or a way to stop the tragedy of the commons. And a good thing to always say is the privatization of goods like that, because whenever it's a public good, you have less concern about the continuation of being able to harvest fish from there. But if it's private, you are more concerned about your own goods, right? So that's just a quick FRQ tip. But when thinking of biodiversity loss, try to remember HIPCO, because it can help you remember some of these things that you can use on your test. Okay, jumping into 2.2, we have ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are ways nature contributes to our society. So in this section, we are thinking, ask not what you can do for your ecosystem, but what your ecosystem can do for you. Because most of APES, we're thinking about what humans are doing, what we can do to change that. But this time we're thinking, okay, we'll give the ecosystem this. What are they doing for us, right? So this is basically how ecosystems benefit us and the goods that come from natural resources, and how the ecosystems have measurable economic and financial value to humans. So we're thinking, where's the money coming from, right? So some human activities can disrupt these services, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because they're doing all this stuff for us. They generate us millions of dollars, but we kind of mess it up anyway. So, and then we'll talk about conservation strategies that we can use to keep these economic services coming. Okay, so we've got 4 types of services, and we've got provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting. Okay, so provisioning. These are products that the ecosystems provide. Think of water, like think of a rescue raft. Think of those provisions, right? When you have provisions, it's things that are just given to you, right? We can think water, food. Provisioning services are things that the ecosystem just gives us, okay? So taken directly from Mother Nature, wood that is used as wood, so like furniture for houses. You fish, you cast a reel, you reel it in, and nature's giving you a fish to eat, right? So we're thinking fish, honey, lumber, berries. So these are provisioning. This is Mother Nature just giving us provisions, right? So these are goods that are made from natural resources that the ecosystem provides. Okay. So how do humans disrupt this? How do we mess it up? Basically, over harvesting, taking too much. So giving it to us, we're greedy. We're taking too much. Water pollution. Water is fresh water just given to us, aquifers, right? Polluting that, we're wasting what nature gave us. Cleaning land for agriculture and urbanization. So disruptions lead to a decrease in the value of each ecosystem service. So that means that we have ecological and economic consequences when we disrupt these things. Next up, we have regulating services. These are service in the form of regulating processes, but let's look at what that means. So that means the ecosystems stabilize the climate for us or other conditions like that. They stabilize what is happening. So this saves us money from having to clean up unstable stuff. So when you're thinking of this one, think the ecosystem's regulating it for us so that we don't have to do stuff after, right? If you make a regulation like an act, right? If you're regulating how much something goes out into the environment, it's so that you don't have to clean that. Instead of regulating it, you don't have to like pull it out of the air later, right? So you do it first, and then you save us money from not having to clean that up. I love to think for this example, wetlands, how they provide like a way for us to absorb storm surge and things like that. So whenever the wetlands absorb flooding and stuff, it saves the towns next to it from having to clean up, right? But if we paved that wetland, where does the water have to go but up, right? But the wetlands are able to absorb it. But other great examples are air and water purification. So we're thinking plants, right? They can take in pollutants and purify the water and air. Great example of this is trees that save us money by sequestering carbon dioxide because it reduces the expensive consequences of climate change. And how do humans mess this one up? Deforestation. Okay, so cutting down trees, we don't get that carbon dioxide sequestered anymore. Like, that's a lose-lose for us. Biodiversity goes down, the regulating service goes down, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with the economic consequences instead of trees just doing it for us for free. So, okay, next up we've got cultural services. This one's kind of easy to remember because you can just it's non-material services. So think national park, okay? National park, it's there anyway, it's nature, right? And you're charged a $15 fee to get in. That's us just pocketing money for you to go see the natural formation, which I'm kidding. It's also for like keeping up everything that happens at the national parks. But think of how the money that is generated from the national parks is generated because the natural feature is there, right? If there was nothing there wouldn't be any money generated from that. So that's a cultural service. It's things that nature provided for us that we can capitalize on. Another good example of this is hunting or fishing licenses. So just having that availability to hunt and fish generates us money. And how do humans mess this up? Deforestation, pollution, things like that degrade the natural beauty, right? So this one's all about beauty. And the last one we have is supporting services. So this is a process done by an ecosystem that supports a valuable human action. Okay, and this is kind of like a combination and supports the other three. Natural ecosystems support the processes we do ourselves, making them cheaper and easier. So an example of this would be pollination. So in agriculture, the bees and butterflies pollinate a farmer's crop and allow him to sell his crops, us to be fed, and increases the amount of crops he can sell. So their profits, yields of food, they're all supported by the pollinators, right? Without the bees, we would have to go and just like Mendel with his peas, right? Pollinating each little individual crop, but instead the bees are able to do it for us. So that's money, time, that's all saved, and our yields go up. So that's how supporting services generate us money. And how do humans mess this up? By pollinator and habitat loss and filling in the wetlands for development. But yeah, so we have 4 types of services. And now we're going to talk about the economic value that this generates us. So ecosystem services are vital to the welfare of societies worldwide. Think about all the things that nature provides us that we are able to use to make money. That is what ecosystem services are. So provisioning, we're thinking the whole fishing industry, the whole furniture industry, like everything that is made from natural things is in ecosystem services. So nature does, in addition to that, nature does so many things for us for free that would cost us lots of money to do ourselves, like sequestering carbon dioxide, filtering out air and water pollutants. So it's estimated that the world's ecosystem services combined are worth $33 trillion. So that's really what the ecosystem is doing for us, right? Pollination, which is a supporting service, is the backbone of the agriculture industry. Seriously, we would not be able to make close to the amount of food we need if we had to go pollinate each little plant individually, right? And then water purification, provisioning service saves humans billions of dollars from having to purify our own water. And then we'll talk about conservation strategies. So habitat conservation strategies are most impactful when it comes to preserving biodiversity. So it's important to preserve nature so that it can continue to support our economy and our services. So if it's $33 trillion, we really need to make sure that that is able to continue. Like there's so many things we rely on in that we really need to continue. So breeding programs, endangered species can be kept active, be kept captive in areas to promote mating and population growth. So this is really important because, like we talked about how important biodiversity is, we need to make sure every endangered species is kept continued. We do not want it to go extinct because of biodiversity loss means that our ecosystems are going to go down, which is going to be bad for our ecosystem services, right? national parks and reserves. So we have government agencies that are able to protect vital ecosystems by prohibiting harmful activities such as logging and fishing and hunting. So that's overexploitation. If we didn't have those quotas for logging and fishing and hunting, they would be overexploited, which we know leads to biodiversity loss. That's our HIPCO, right? HIPCO. Federal and international efforts. So I know y'all were talking about laws earlier in the chat. Federal laws like the Endangered Species Act and international treaties, such as the Conservation on International Trade in Endangered Species, can help preserve biodiversity. So on the FRQ, there's always a question that's like propose a solution. And I would always say, or if they were like propose a solution to this biodiversity loss, right? It's a good idea to say a law would be good, a law that would prevent overexploitation. But I know that's what my teacher told me, and I use that on my AP test. But proposing a law is always a good thing to do. Okay, on to our next topic. We have island biogeography. Okay, this one is pretty, it's pretty good to understand. Let's just go. Island biogeography studies how factors such as species richness and species evenness, the two types of species diversity, are affected by an island's relative size and location. Okay, I'm going to read this slow and then we'll go into it. According to island biogeography theory, the larger an island is, and the closer it is in relation to the mainland, the more diverse it will be. Okay, so let's think about this part by part. The closer an island is to the mainland, the higher species diversity it will have. Okay, so let's think. How did the species get to the island? If it's far away, like Guam, is it really going to be likely that some type of mammal or, like, let's say a tiger, is it likely that the tiger floated onto the floated from the mainland to the island? Not really. Is it likely that the tiger swam to Guam? Probably not, right? So more species are able to make it to a closer island. So think of how far a bird can fly. So if they can't make it to the island, they won't populate it. So the closer an island is, the more species it will have on it. Also, a larger island will have a higher species diversity. Let's think. A larger island has more availability of a niche that a species can inhabit, right? So the more places that a species can kind of make its home, right? If it has a smaller island, it has a really narrow niche that it can fit, right? But larger, more places for a species to fit in. So larger island, more species diversity. Closer to the mainland, higher species diversity. I always like to think of Madagascar, how close it is to Africa and how big it is allows it to have lots of animals, like the penguins, right? No, just kidding. But like Madagascar is a big island close to the mainland. It's going to be inhabited by a lot of species, but Guam or Hawaii are going to have a lower species diversity and a lower, just a lower species diversity. Okay, so another thing to note is that islands have a higher percentage of specialist species. So that means that they're more vulnerable to invasive species. So because islands are small and the species, or not that they're small, but that they're their own kind of ecosystem, when they come, they adapt to what happens, like the species over time adapts. So whenever an invasive species come in, they are very much able to disrupt the ecosystem because it's very precise on an island, right? Because it's isolated from other events. So islands have limited space and resources making these species adapt very, very narrowly to match a specific niche on that island. So when invasive species come in, it really disrupts how the islands work. So islands are more susceptible to invasive species. Okay, so now we're going to talk about those two types of species diversity. We've got species richness and species evenness. So these both are terms that measured up biodiversity, but there are some slight differences you need to know. Okay. Species richness is the total number of different species in an ecosystem. Okay. Then we've got species evenness, which refers to the number of individuals within each species in a community. Okay, let's look at our little diagram. In area 1, if you look at the number of each type of tree, we've got 25 of each, right? So we would say there's a high species evenness. But if we look at area 2, we have 70 of one type of tree. Let's think if a disease came through and wiped out this tree that there's 70 of, and there's only 6, 12, and 12 of the other type. If that tree that has 70 is wiped out, that area is going to be very devoid of trees, right? Because 70 of them were wiped out, and there's only what, 24 left? Something like that, 24, 30 trees left. But if we look at the other one, and if one species is wiped out, that's only 25. That's only 1/4 instead of like 50% on the other one, right? So a high species evenness is going to be good for biodiversity because it's going to make it more resistant to things like disease that can wipe out a whole species. And then species richness is the number of species in a community. So think if one species got wiped out, if there's a lot more species in that community that can kind of make up for the loss of that species, it's going to be better for biodiversity and better for that ecosystem. Whereas if we think back to the island thing, there's only a few species on that island. If one gets wiped out, that's a huge part of the food web. So more species is better. Yeah, I think we can go on to our next topic, which is ecological tolerance. Okay, so this is kind of a good thing to think of for this whole APES course. Ecological tolerance is really important and how humans impact it. So ecological tolerance refers to the range of environmental conditions that a species can withstand and survive in. Okay, so this is before injury or death occurs, and these can be things like temperature, salinity, pH, sunlight. So I like to think of like a little chart like this. So like kind of like a bell curve, where we have optimal conditions in the middle, and then where it's kind of faltering out to the side, we have stress conditions, and then out to the ends we have injury or death, right? So a really good one to think of for this, an example, is human body temperature. So we're best at 97 to 98 degrees. So whenever we have so the zone of physiological stress is when we get below 95 or above 99.5, when we have a fever, right? We're in a stressed physiological state. That can lead to infertility, lack of growth, decreased activity. We can't think straight. We can't function well. Whereas in our optimal range, we can live, reproduce, function normally. So then when we get even lower than that, our zone of intolerance, we are thinking temperatures are below 86 degrees or above 107.6. So that's whenever you can't stand it anymore and it's gonna go, it's bad, right? So let's think of this in more context, right? In the context of this whole class. So whenever we have climate change, right? When the temperature goes up, the species in the water have a very specific range of tolerance, right? there's a set of temperatures that they can tolerate. And if the water gets too warm, that's outside of their range of tolerance, right? So they're not going to be able to reproduce. They're not going to be able to function normally. And that means that they're not going to be able to carry down the species if they can't reproduce, if they're in a zone of physiological stress, right? Because the temperature is too high for them, they're not going to be able to reproduce and carry the species down, right? So that's why climate change leads to the temperature going up, leads to a loss of biodiversity because it's outside of their range of tolerance. They can't reproduce if it's too hot for them, right? So that's another thing that goes into this is how genetic diversity is important. So if there are organisms in a population of a species that has the genes that their range of tolerance goes a little wider than other ones, or their range of tolerance is they can tolerate warmer temperatures, they are going to be able to survive and reproduce, whereas the ones that don't have those genes can't. So the ones that don't have the genes to stand the high temperatures, they are not going to be reproducing and carrying on those genes. But the ones that can, so this organism can reproduce in the high temperatures, they're going to be able to pass that gene down, and then through adaptations, right, which is the genes being passed down, that species is now going to be able to continue, and the genes that are passed down means that they can reproduce in the high temperatures. So that's why genetic diversity is really important, and that's just like an example in the context of like the climate change and stuff that we'll be seeing later in the in our nights, right? So environmental stress, just like how we were saying, range of tolerance for species, environmental stress is when the conditions are outside of this range, and this disrupts how they can function and survive and reproduce. So think pollution, habitat destruction, climate change. And the environmental conditions of, say, the temperature or salinity or pH, when those are shifted from their normal places, the species that are surviving in the conditions are now in a zone of stress because they're not where they're supposed to be. So just like us, the amount of environmental stress can vary within the individual, which is what I was talking about with genetic diversity. If one individual has the genes that make them able to withstand it better and reproduce, they're going to be better fit for that environment. So environmental stress can lead to lack of reproduction, which means the species is not going to continue, and that's bad for biodiversity. Okay, so now we've got two things: acclimation and adaptation. So both of these refer to changes organisms may undergo in their environment as a result of a trigger or a stressor. Okay, so these seem similar, they kind of rhyme, but we've got to know the difference. Okay, so acclimation refers to an organism's adjustment in their physiology or behavior in result to climatic change. Okay, this one, I like to think of Mount Everest, okay? So I don't know if y'all ever fell into the Wikipedia rabbit hole. I did, about climbing Mount Everest, but when you go up that high in the atmosphere, when you go up that high, the O2, the oxygen available to breathe, goes down, okay? So you need to stay up there for a while. You need to let your body adjust to these new climatic change, this new environment you're in, and allow your heart to kind of to adjust, and your lungs, right? So that they call it acclimatization. And it's your own individual bodily acclimation to the environmental conditions, right? You have to let your body have time to adjust. So these are over a short period of time. It's like 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then you go back. Then this is within your lifetime, right? If we look over at the other one, adaptations, this refers to a species' adjustments in their physiology or behavior in result to a variety of changes. So this is a species. This is the whole species responding to something. These are long period times long time periods and occur during many generations. So this is how a whole species is responding to something like climate change and the temperatures going up. This isn't just one person climbing Mount Everest, right? This is if the whole species had to now live on Mount Everest, how we're going to adapt to that, how our bodies are going to change to live on Mount Everest. Okay, so then this is kind of like the range of tolerance example. So if if we're talking about that same species, that same organism I was talking about that was able to survive in those higher temperatures and reproduce, that's going to be, they're going to pass that on to their kids, and their kids are going to be able to survive longer, and they're pass their kids. So it's like an adaptation that makes them better fit for that environment. And this is allowing them to be in that new range of tolerance. So say the stressor or trigger is the pH of the ocean going up, right? From ocean, I mean, it would be going down from ocean acidification, right? The species that are able to continue to live and reproduce in this new environment are going to pass that advantage down to their kids, and that they're going to pass it down to their kids. They're going to be more favorable in this new condition because they're able to reproduce. So adaptations are passed down over generations, whereas acclimation is your short-term acclimatized acclimation to the environment. Okay, now we've got natural disruptions to ecosystems. Okay, in some cases, natural disruptions can be more influential than anything we can do to the environment, so human activity. And these can completely change the composition of an ecosystem and its biodiversity. So this is a natural event that can completely put the ecosystem in haywire. And so there's some things like natural variation, which if you've learned in APES about the tilt of the Earth, so Earth's climate can be naturally varied over geologic time for reasons like slight changes in Earth's tilt, which can cause many ice ages or warmer periods. But we'll also get into different types of natural disruptions. So we've got wildfires. These may result from long periods of drought, high temperatures, and or human activities, like say a gender reveal. But these happen episodically, so when environmental conditions are right. These can reduce an ecosystem to secondary succession, which we will talk about later tonight. Sometimes wildfires can be helpful to an ecosystem by burning up dead logs and trees and clearing out the brush and returning those nutrients back to the soil, but that's when they're controlled, right? Uncontrolled fires, like sometimes those wildfires that are super detrimental in the western US, they can be really detrimental because they're uncontrolled. They're burning too much biodiversity and just super destructive. And when I say it has to go through succession, I mean it has to start from basically scratch, right? That's not good. That removed a lot of habitat, space, and biodiversity. Okay, and now we're going to get into flooding. Flooding can result from other natural disruptions such as sea level rise and extreme weather events. Let's think about urbanization here. Okay, so urbanization is kind of us like spreading. It's us like putting our industrial stuff everywhere, paving roads. Okay, so if we pave everywhere, that means that the water can't go down. Like there's a block there now, but can't go seep down into the grass that used to be there. It's blocked. So where does it have to go but up, right? So that's where we kind of get flooding. Let's think of coastal towns like Galveston, Texas. With sea level rise, flooding is more common and more disastrous, and it disrupts human events, but it also disrupts the natural environment. Droughts are becoming more intense and frequent due to regional climate changes and as a result of global warming. So low precipitation, and we'll also look into the El Nino and La Nina tomorrow, about how that can influence droughts and that can have really bad economic effects. And then we have sea level rise. So this has intensified in recent years by climate change and glacier melting. Okay, so we have a pop quiz. If y'all can go in the chat, the Zoom chat. What are some other natural disruptions that you can think of? Other natural disruptions. I don't know if I can see the chat. I'm gonna try. I can't see the chat. Okay. Ooh, those are some good ones, y'all. I see blizzards, volcanic eruption, good. Hurricanes, yes. Okay, let's look at what the answers are. So we've got pest outbreaks, windstorms, landslides, tornadoes. Have y'all been seeing those crazy tornadoes in like Ohio and Oklahoma right now? Oh my gosh, I'm scared. Blizzards, heat waves, hurricanes. Okay, so my town was hit by a hurricane. It completely disrupted our ecosystem. I don't know if y'all have ever seen this, but sometimes after huge hurricane events, plants can start blooming because of how damaged they need to get I don't know, they're way out of whack, and then they end up dying because they bloomed too early. Tsunamis, volcanic activity, we will talk way more about that. Avalanches, earthquakes, hail. Yeah, so let's look at some of the effects. So biodiversity composition, depending on the type of disruption, the biodiversity may be affected due to habitat destruction, migration, other factors. So like the hurricane I was talking about, people's homes were destroyed. So when they evacuated, they never came back. So think about how that affected the composition of my town. People left, so that changed how it was going to work, right? Animals, when things like volcanic eruptions happen, their habitat has now changed. It used to be grass and now there's rock over it, right? There's nothing for them to eat, right? So they have to migrate away, and that changes the whole composition, the species richness, right? The species evenness, the genetic diversity, they're gone. So that changes how the ecosystem is functioning, and it leads to biodiversity loss mostly. Habitat changes, so habitat destruction brought on by disruptions may result in ecological succession, which I keep saying this, we will talk about later tonight. They can have complete landscape changes. So just like I was talking about, volcanic eruptions cover everywhere in rock, or clear cutting can lead to no places for the birds to go, right? Their trees, their habitat was cut down. So sea level rise can turn a grassland into a marsh. So the animals that relied on the grassland ecosystem or biome, right? Their habitat is now marsh. That's not where they're supposed to be, right? So that changes their whole habitat. Okay, let's get a little deeper into adaptations. So good rule to know: survival of the fittest. The organisms that have the right genes for an ecosystem tend to live longer. So we're thinking they tend to live longer. They get to make it to reproductive age. They get to pass those genes on, right? So these genes, making them be more fit for their environment, making them reach reproductive age and pass the genes on, leads to incremental changes that are passed down through the generations, and those are called adaptations. Okay, this is a really key thing to know. Animals don't adapt. So let's say I move to Siberia. I don't adapt to those conditions. If I were to say have a mutation and be able to pass it down to my kids, that would be an adaptation, right? I think there's like something about the people that live at high elevation, like there's an actual adaptation that they can like take in more oxygen through their lungs. I forget where they live, but that's like an adaptation that's passed down through generations, right? One person didn't adapt. It's capable organisms pass down their genes and species adapt, right? Species adapt over time. And let's look at the types of adaptations we're looking at. We've got structural adaptations. So this involves changes in an organism's external processes. So things on the outside that they can change in their structure to make them survive longer, reach reproductive age, and pass down those traits, right? Because if there's a trait that's less favorable in structure, they're going to be less likely to be able to reach reproductive age and pass that down. So that's why the trait that is favorable is more likely to be passed down and spread to the whole species. Because in the end, there will be more of the offspring of the favorable kind, which is why it's passed to most of the species. It's over generations, right? So this would be like thorns in a plant for protection. The ones that don't have thorns are going to be more likely to be eaten. So they're going to fade away from the population because they're more likely to be eaten and less likely to reproduce. Camouflage, fur, and then we have physiological adaptations. So this is changes in an internal process. So resistant to drought. So really having those water-saving mechanisms that cacti have, combined with their structural adaptation of thorns. So the inside of conserving that water would be a physiological adaptation, or venom produced by snakes. And then we have behavioral adaptations. So this is changes in an organism's behavior, like hibernation and migration. So what we can think of is that the organisms that started doing these behavioral adaptations first, they were able to have more offspring than, or like they were more favorable for the environment. So they were able to pass down those favorable genes or behaviors to their offspring, which just increased their ability to live and reproduce, rather than one that doesn't have this adaptation. Let's look at some of these adaptations in action. We've got hibernation, which is behavioral, camouflage, structural, so it's on their outside, right? They're external. And then we have venom, which is physiological. So kind of think like anatomy and physiology. Like I always think of that like picture of a human body and like it has like skeleton. Like physiological is like the inside, right? Structural is outside or external. Okay, let's look at ecological succession. Okay, so I said it like 3 times that we're gonna get to this, and we did. So ecological succession refers to the gradual and predictable, so we know what's gonna happen, process of change in a species composition and structure of an ecosystem over time. Okay, so it occurs as one community replaces another. And let's just jump right into it. There are 2 types of ecological succession. We've got primary and secondary. Primary succession, which we'll look at first, refers to colonization and establishment of plant life in an area devoid of soil. Keywords, devoid of soil. Primary succession is going to happen when we literally have no soil to plant plants in. What's going to happen is pioneer species, such as lichen or moss, they are brought in by the wind to colonize this rock. There's no soil, so there's just a rock. And the lichen are able to use chemical weathering. They release acids that release the nutrients in the rock and create a like shallow rocky soil that other plants can come colonize and build up the layers of organic material that make up soil. But first, so we're thinking volcanic eruption. Think of all that magma flowing over and then it hardens into rock. Now, no grass can come just sprout on the rock, right? We need that rock to be some kind of soil where more grasses and things can come colonize. So I just want to look at the picture before we look at secondary. when we have primary succession, we're thinking bare rock, then we're going to lichen, which can release the nutrients inside, and then small annual plants and lichens can continue to build up the organic material. See how the soil is kind of getting darker, like that brown is kind of building up that organic material. So the lichen continue breaking down that rock layer and making the soil deeper and able to support more plants. And then let's go back and look at secondary succession. So this occurs when an existing ecosystem is disturbed or destroyed, but there's still soil. So we don't need to go through all the process of breaking down literal rocks into soil. There's still soil on the ground. We just need vegetation, right? So think clear cutting. We just cut everything away. There's still soil. We just need to start from basically vegetation zero, right? We need some dandelion seeds in the wind to come colonize this soil. So if we're looking at secondary succession, it's like starting from where the grasses and perennials are, or in like things that have deforestation, things like that, which have cleared out, or wildfires. Wildfires don't literally burn up the soil to where it's bare rock, right? They just need to start from vegetation, right? So we're not starting at all the way on the left, we're starting somewhere in the middle. And then we've got climax communities. So climax communities is a stable, mature community that forms at the end. So if we look back at this again, the climax community is the tall trees, right? So this is a balance between environmental conditions and species interactions to where it's thriving, right? A climax community can remain unchanged for thousands of years, like those redwood forests, right? Those are a climax community. Old growth forest, where some of the oldest trees on Earth reside, are climax communities that have remained unchanged. So something really good's happening here, right? They're stable. They're really like the species interaction are working together to make the whole ecosystem benefit, and they're really stable and good. Okay, now it's time for practice. I think let's just go through some of these practice questions, and then we'll see if we get to the cram quiz, because I don't know how that's gonna work. Oh, sorry. But how does island biogeography theory explain the diversity observed on islands? So how does island biogeography theory explain the diversity observed on islands? So answer in the chat. Sorry, my dog is barking. I'm gonna go close my door. Sorry, guys. My family just got home. Okay, so y'all, my dog is so old and crotchety. He barks all the time. Okay, let's look at the answer. The closer an island is and the bigger it is, the more biodiverse it is. Okay, so we're thinking, how'd those species get to the island? Well, if it's far away, they probably didn't get there, right? And the bigger it is, the more availability for things on the island for the species to kind of find its niche and be able to not have competition from other things, right? So relatively large and close to land, it will probably be more biodiverse than a smaller, farther away island. Okay, how do ecosystem services contribute to human well-being? So maybe write an example of what ecosystems do for us, right? What do they contribute for us? How do they save us money? So answer in the chat. I wish you had some cram music right now. Good job, y'all. This is good. And this is good for the FRQs. Like, sometimes they ask, like, how can they, what can the ecosystem do for us? And, yeah, regulating services. Okay, so let's look at the answers. We got provisioning services. I saw a lot of y'all type that. So we've got material things that the ecosystem's just like, here you go on a platter. We've got water. Here you go. Food. Here you go. Regulating services, these regulate processes such as air purification. I think buffer zones would be regulating, but air purification, water purification. So this one, good one to remember, is trees literally take carbon out of the air, which is a big problem for us, right? And would cost a lot of money if we had to do that ourselves. So it saves us money down the road, right? So we're thinking, what's the ecosystem doing for us that would cost us money if it didn't happen? Cultural services, national parks, right? Aesthetic, spiritual, recreational value provided to us that we literally get money from just being there, right? Supporting services. These support the other services. We're going to think pollination. Okay, let's see. Question 3. How can natural disruptions lead to ecological succession? Provide specific examples for where this occurs. So a natural disruption, so we talked about some types of natural disruptions, and how can that lead to ecological succession? And then see if you have an example. I wish we had music right now. Boo, crowdcast. Okay, so I saw a question about how do you know which natural disruptions lead to primary or secondary? So you're just going to want to think, what does this natural disrupt, like primary is there's no soil left, and then secondary is there's soil left. So think about what the natural disruption does to the environment. So when we look at the answers, so we have, I saw a lot of people saying volcanic eruptions, which is right. Volcanic eruptions lead to new rock being formed over what used to be soil. So we're going to need to literally break down that rock in order to have soil there so that vegetation can do it. So we are thinking it leads to primary succession because there's new rock, right? Wildfires and clear cutting, those are going to lead to secondary succession because the soil's left there, but the vegetation's not. The vegetation's all gone. We need to start from vegetation 0, but there's still soil. So the way you know the difference is like, what does the natural disruption leave behind? So when the fire is all put out or the magma is all put out, we either have rock that we need to literally colonize, or we have soil that just needs new vegetation. So that's kind of how you know the difference. Let's also look right here. It says floods. I don't know if I saw that in the chat, but floods can lead to secondary succession. And then let's look at question 4. This question also asks where this occurs. Do we have to say, I wouldn't really say locations, just like at the volcanic eruption site or like where the wildfire occurs. But let's look at question 4. What are the 3 types of adaptations organisms have developed? Explain what each means. Okay, 3 types of adaptations. So these are things that are passed down. Let's see if y'all can get this one. Oh, also, we might be able to do the Cram Quiz. I think we'll try, but all the slides will be posted in your stuff, and you'll be able to see the slides and the Cram quizzes. They're linked. This question's asking about the 3 types. We kind of gave examples for each one. Good job, y'all. These are all good. Okay, should we look at the answer? We've got 3 types: structural, physiological, and behavioral. Structural is the external things. Think thorns, camouflage, things that organisms can change on their outside, not organisms, species. Species can change on their outside to make them more fit and able to be better in their environment. And then physiological is the inside, things like venom, resistance to drought. And then we've got behavioral. So these are changes in their behavior, like hibernation and migration, that makes them better suited to their environment. Ms. McLean, do you have something correct?
I've shown back up. Okay, so I just wanted to make a few announcements, and then I figured it would be fun to jump over to a Cram quiz. Looks like we lost Cade though. So just a few announcements. Sorry about all the issues with Crowdcast. It's a little bit out of our control, but we really appreciate everyone jumping over here with us. For tomorrow, just to make sure that like we're starting off with everybody coming to the right place, go where you would have gone to Crowdcast, and we'll have like a little CTA button up here, and it's going to pop you over to the correct Zoom. So that's how you'll find it. Just go like where you would have gone to Crowdcast, and then we'll pop you over to our new Zoom link for tomorrow. And then also take the survey if you can. We want to know how we did. And then, yeah, Mary, do you feel comfortable doing the
Yes. Okay. Let's hope this works. I'm gonna click the link. Can you see it? Did it just change?
Scroll up a little bit, maybe.
I think it's about to load.
Okay.
It like always pops up down here. Hopefully. Okay.
There we go.
Start. Confirm.
Yeah. Okay. So everyone, if you want to grab your phones and scan that QR code, and you can follow along on your phones to take the quiz, and then we'll just go for like about another 10 minutes or so, and then we will call it a night.
Awesome. And this one's shorter, so we should be able to get through a little bit. Okay, let's see if I'll pop the link in chat. Pull that to me. No. Post everybody. Yay, y'all send emojis. I want to see the emojis. Okay. I think you can keep joining if I start, so let's just go ahead and start. Okay. How does biodiversity contribute ecosystem resistance and resilience? So how can biodiversity help them bounce back? It increases the ability of an ecosystem to stand and recover from disturbances. It determines the number of individuals in a population. It influences the physical characteristics of the habitat, or biodiversity has no impact. So what's biodiversity? What does it do? How does it help? Okay, let's reveal the answer. Most of y'all answered. Okay, we got it. I feel like I kind of gave it away when I was reading the question, but good job, everybody. Next. In what way do forests contribute to regulating climate as an ecosystem service? Does it filter out water before it enters groundwater systems? Does it offer recreational opportunities for hiking? Does it absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis? Does it provide a habitat for migratory birds? So what does regulating climate? Mhm. Okay. This guy already answered. Okay, I'm revealing the answer. Okay, good, everybody. 79%. I think a few said A, filtering water out before it enters groundwater systems. But um, mostly we want to look at carbon dioxide photosynthesis for regulating. Um, yeah. Next question. I think this one um is just less because sometimes AP has those questions where it's like, which of these is the most correct? So usually we want to think about carbon sequestration for forests. That's just a really good thing to know for FRQs. It'll be like, oh, these people are cutting down a forest. How is this bad for the environment? Well, the trees are no longer there to sequester carbon, which can lead to more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and climate change. And then it's like, for example, propose a solution to this, to what you said in part A about the negative impacts. And you could say, privatize, you could say like, laws about how much people can cut down, or laws about making people replant, things like that. So you mostly just want to think carbon sequestration because FRQs that comes up and it's an easy way to just get that answer down. Okay, next one. What would be a potential indirect effect on ecosystem services following a significant reduction in pollinator populations due to pesticide overuse? Indirect effect. Decline in crop yields, impacting food availability, increased plant growth due to less predation on flowering plants, enhanced soil fertility, decomposing organic material left by dead pollinators, higher air quality from decreased pollen distribution. There we go. So indirect effect, significant reduction in pollinator populations. Looks like we almost got everybody answered. Okay. Okay, gonna reveal the answer. Good job, everybody. I see most of us put A, so a decline in crop yields because pollination is a supporting service that does something for us that we would spend a lot of money doing ourselves, right? So if there was a reduction in pollinator populations, we would have to deal with that all ourselves, and I know I wouldn't want to do that. So that would lead to a decline in crop yields. Next, what happens when an invasive predator is introduced to an isolated island ecosystem? Native prey populations may decline rapidly due to lack of evolved defenses against new predators. Native predator populations immediately adapt defense mechanisms against predators. Wow, they're really cool to say that. Invasive predators establish small populations that do not interact with native organisms. Invasive predators will not survive long term without human intervention. We almost got everybody answered. Let's go ahead and reveal. Okay, good job, everybody. We got native prey populations may decline rapidly due to lack of evolved defenses. So they are on that island. They're so isolated. They're just like, I fit right into this perfect little niche for myself. I've adapted perfectly for it. And I don't have many predators. So when those invasive species come in, they really are able to wipe them out. Like the dodo bird, they couldn't fly because they didn't need to, and they just got wiped out when invasive species came out. We were in the invasive species. Okay. What factor increases the biodiversity of an island ecosystem? Proximity to the mainland, elevation of the island, shape of the island, or coloration of the island soil. I think this should be one. I'm gonna reveal. Okay, good job. I don't think I need to explain this one. We all got it. A population living at sea level is moved to high altitude with lower oxygen levels. What is this an example of? Exceeding the tolerance limit for oxygen availability, initial succession event, an increase in adaptation radiation, or a decrease in genetic diversity. So a population that lives at sea level, and then they go up to like Denver or something, like mile high, so they have lower oxygen levels there. What's good in that? Let's use some test taking skills. Elimination. Okay. Reveal. Okay, good. Everybody got it. Even though we had some weird terms in there, we didn't really see initial succession events. If they were using a different word for primary succession, that has nothing to do with this, right? Okay, we'll just move on. Gotta see if we can go. In an ecosystem with a narrow range of tolerance for temperature, how would an extended period of global warming most likely affect the native plant species? The plants may develop gradual resistance to higher temperature. The plant's geographic distribution might remain unchanged due to adaptation. The plants may experience thermal stress leading to decrease in biodiversity. Plants may increase their reproductive rates to maintain population. Which one's the best? Okay, guys, answer so we can keep going. Okay, really. Okay, so we had a lot of people say A, which could be true, but we want to think best answer, and the question we want to read closely. It says narrow range of tolerance. So if they have a narrower range of tolerance, we're thinking a bell curve that looks like this, right? They're really suited to the narrow range. So whenever the actual environmental conditions are shifted over, they're not in that at all, right? They're not really overlapping with if there's a shift because they're really narrow. They need that really narrow environmental conditions. So if they experience thermal stress, it's going to lead to a decrease because they have that narrow range. If they had a wider range, they might be more apt to develop a resistance or adaptation. Okay, let's see if we can do this one quick. A species with a wide tolerance for salinity in water is likely to be found in which of the ocean, desert, oasis, we're almost the end of the stream. I think it's like 9 o'clock, isn't it? Reveal. Oh gosh. Species with a wide tolerance of salinity in water. Okay, Mr. Green.
We tricked you on that one. You want me to do it?
Oh, that one looks like a trick one.
We tricked them. I can go over this one. Yeah, so something that would have a wide tolerance would have to be able to handle a lot of change. The open ocean doesn't change in its salinity very much because it is the open ocean. It's enormous. And so the salinity is not really going to go up or down ever. But the estuary is going to go up and down in the salinity a lot. If it's been really hot out and not a lot of rain, the water is going to evaporate. You're going to have a lot of salt comparatively, or maybe it rains a lot and all the water gets pushed out into the ocean, and then you're going to have really low salinity. So yes, species with a wide tolerance are likely to be found in an estuary where it changes a lot. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for staying with us today as we had our change. Again, one more time, to get to us next time tomorrow, please go to Crowdcast where you'll find a link to the Zoom. We don't have it right now, but we will have it by then, and we will be ready to start night 2, take the survey and get some rest, and we will see everybody again tomorrow. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.